the title today is Cybersecurity for Senior Managers and Risk Officers in Housing Associations. There was an alternative title, Cybersecurity for Housing Associations, but the emphasis really is on that this is not for IT people. Now, I know we have a few IT people looking in, and that's okay, but it really is aimed at those non-IT people who want to get a better understanding of cybersecurity. So let's get started. In a moment, I'll briefly introduce us as a company. I'll ask, what is cybersecurity? Because the problem, as I see it, is cybersecurity is a whole organization problem. And unless every functional area is involved in the solution or in the protection, then you've got a problem. It's not an IT problem. We look at what the risks are and where they can come from. We look at standards and guidelines. They'll give you some direction if you're not already following a particular guideline. And then I'm going to break down cybersecurity into what I would consider the component parts. And I'm using the NIST approach. It's an American cybersecurity guideline, not a standard, but guidelines that are, I find the language quite accessible and understandable, whereas ISO 27001 is more tech oriented. Then we look briefly at people's responsibilities, and I do this in a lot of presentations to remind people that everybody has a role to play and you should be aware of yours. And finally, the board want to be assured that this, let's say, area of risk is being well managed. Okay. Us, we see ourselves as risk and compliance professionals like many of you on the call today. We keep our skills sharp through membership of various organizations. I'm not the only one who's a member of organizations. Fiona is a member of the Association of Compliance Officers. I'm involved, as Fiona said, in the development of standards, and we as a company, we supply a GRC solution, also called calQrisk. We trade now as calQrisk because our customers started calling us by the product name. We have over 200 customers and many more using the software who are customers of our customers, but generally in the financial services sector and in the not-for-profit sector, so housing associations, charities, and sports organizations. And that's us as a company. Incidentally, if you're interested in the whole theme of resilience and cybersecurity, information security is one of the pillars of that. We produced a white paper on the subject of risk management and resilience last year, and it's it's quite popular, so you'll find it on our website. Okay. You might know Robert Mueller, who investigated Russia and their involvement in American elections. He's a former FBI director, and he said there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. Now, in the last year, according to RSM, 25% of housing associations in the UK experienced a cyber attack. Now, I think the figure probably is higher because they're the ones who've reported it or who know about it. Certainly, since the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in the number of malicious emails, and the prediction now is that cybercrime will cost the world in excess of 10 trillion by 2025. So it's huge business for criminals, and nobody, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the health authority or whether you're a housing association, we're all vulnerable and likely to be attacked. If you think what your stakeholders, and by that I mean your tenants, the regulator, the people who fund you, I'd say employees, anybody who's interested in your organization or is affected by your organization will have an expectation regarding cybersecurity. And I've tried to articulate it here in these 6 bullet points. First, that you understand cyber risks and you prioritize this because you're protecting a lot of personal information, or you should be protecting it, and hopefully it is. As you grow and as you add more strategic direction to your organization, you should ensure that your IT capability matches the organization's ambitions, that there isn't an imbalance there. Every initiative, every activity, I think, in organizations these days is underpinned or supported by IT in some way. It's hard to get away from it now. So if you don't have those capabilities, the skills, the knowledge, you are exposed. There's an expectation that systems are secure, and those 2 points are linked, because you need experienced and skilled people to be able to make systems secure. Your policies and procedures should be consistent and appropriate. For example, giving people access to systems, only give them access to the information they need to do their job. It's called least privilege. Procedures for granting access, for revoking access, these all need to be in place. Often only given lip service to, or not enough attention, is staff training. Every single person who has access to your network, whether it's a board member down to the most lowly paid person, it doesn't matter. If they've access to your network, they need to be trained on cybersecurity. And this isn't a once off or once a year, it's once per quarter. Yes, once per quarter is, I would say, the accepted norm now. That they're aware of it, because the threats are evolving and people need to be kept up to date. And probably the most significant thing, and people don't like maybe planning for something they hope never happens, but you should have a plan for when things go wrong, because you will get attacked, and you better have a plan or you will be exposed. Whoa, yeah, this looks a bit frightening at first, but let me put a bit of English on it. Here's a sentence. The threat agent is the criminal or the aggressive nation state who uses some means, called a vector. It could be an email, it could be social engineering, to attack your systems. They find a vulnerability and exploit it, something that you've not patched. And once they get into one of your servers, one of your assets, then they start doing damage. So that's, I guess, what you're trying to avoid. The bad guys coming in and either stealing information or corrupting information. So what are the risks? And yeah, I copied some headlines from papers, and I looked for ones particular to housing associations. And you probably know who the country's largest housing association hit by cyber attack. But I've put in 5 or 6 here, so you see it doesn't matter whether you're selling pizza or whether you're a council. Everybody is, I would say, liable to be attacked. Now, some criminals will attack certain industries if they think it's lucrative. If they're known to pay ransom, then you might be more likely to attack. That's called threat intelligence. Find out what it is, what is happening other housing associations. That's the most likely predictor of what will happen to you if you haven't had an attack already. But an attack could lead to a data breach. So your tenant's information is exposed, or staff information. And what might follow from that in terms of sanctions or fines or claims. Loss of assets, could be that damage is done to one or more of your servers and you can't provide a service, or data is altered, corrupted. Or the one people talk about most is extortion, ransomware. The most, I suppose, insidious one is the spyware, that somebody sneaks in quietly into your network and quietly harvests data, because the intent is to sell that data on the dark web, for identity theft. They can make money from that. And the scary thing is that the bad guys can be in your network for anything from 98 to 204 days, depending on which research institute's data you take. And finally, a distributed denial of service. That's when the bad guys maybe bombard your systems with lots of requests in a short space of time to cause them to fail. And that could be the prequel to breaking in. If you consider it, it's like hitting the walls so many times that eventually they crumble and the defenses fall away. Or it could be just somebody doing it out of badness if they don't like you and organize an attack on you. Okay, so I think you understand the risks. How about the techniques? I said earlier that this is a whole organization problem. And if you think, well, IT, we pay IT to protect us, they can do maybe half of it at most. And I have to say that the weakest link is the human, and that person who clicks on the link in the email. Now, if IT prevented you from clicking on any link in an email, you probably couldn't do your job. So the human has to use its brain to say, is this link safe? And do I trust this link? I start from a position of, I don't trust any links. And so I click on very few. It's usually an email that comes in from somebody that you trust, and therefore might trust the link. But you have to ask the question, is this a spoofed email? We'll talk about spoofing in a moment under social engineering, where somebody changes the name on the email and it looks like it's coming from, John Brown, who you know well. Social engineering, and I'll have a slide on that next one, just the different techniques people use to convince us curious humans to click on links and open documents that we shouldn't. Or it could be through social networking, depending on the organization and depending on the prize. It could be that the bad guys start by befriending somebody working in the organization. Yeah, it happens, believe me. Our websites, maybe your website is safe, but maybe a website you frequent isn't safe. So be aware that you might be on a poorly or insecure website. I avoid wireless hotspots. Most of them are insecure and you don't know who else is connected. And you might be unintentionally connected to the bad guys. So I avoid them. I tether to my phone when I need to connect. And I've stopped using USB memory sticks many years ago. I have a friend in IT security who, I think he's stopped it now, but he used to drop 10 of these into the car park of a company he was testing early in the morning. And he knew that by 10 o'clock, 3 or 4 of these had been plugged into the network. That was usually his easiest way into the network, but hopefully we've got wise to that. So social engineering. We humans are curious and trusting. And it's these traits, if you like, that make us weak, because we believe this email is from the person that says on the email it's from John Brown. Why wouldn't I believe it? But these two email addresses are not the same. And I'd have to show you it in a different font to show that the L at the end of Royal is actually a capital I when you look at it in a different font. So there are different ways of making an email look, and it is scary, look like the real thing. Phishing is more of a, if spoofing is just an email maybe getting you to do something to make a payment, and it's pretending to come from your boss or from a tenant. Maybe the tenant is getting an email saying the landlord wants you to pay here. Phishing is more, click on this link, fill out this form, open this document. Spear phishing is when it's aimed at a particular individual, and if your name is Andrew, might say, hi Andy, and be very familiar. They will have done their homework and make the email sound very, very believable, and it's aimed at an individual. Vishing is seeking information through voice, through telephone calls, phoning up somebody and getting them to reveal information, and people do. I got a phone call from the bank, a legitimate one, and they started asking me proof of identity, and I said I will not give it to them because they made the call, not me. Crazy that the bank would do that, but I called back. Watering hole. If a bunch of the employees like surfing, and it is known that they go surfing on a famous beach, I won't pick any in particular, and they have a website, maybe the bad guys will infect that surfing website because they know the employees from your organization will go there. That's called a watering hole attack, and you get infected at the watering hole. And don't forget the physical, the bogus inspectors. Again, if you have stuff worth stealing, then there are people brave enough to come in and pretend to be a health and safety inspector or whatever. And I know from my security friend who did this and got into a meeting room and plugged into the network in the meeting room. Yes, the meeting room was connected to the network and he just plugged straight in. He was inside straight away. So yeah, scary, but it happens. Be aware. Let's talk about vulnerabilities. And I put at the top of the list here, the unwitting employee. So I would say to you, make them witting, train them, make them aware and untrusting of any email. It could be poorly or misconfigured IT system. Again, those skills and knowledge you really do need. Or it could be tardiness in patching vulnerabilities in systems. Every system has a vulnerability, and when it's found, you have very short period of time to patch it, because usually when they're found, Microsoft or whomever, Sun, will issue a patch to patch the vulnerability. Most attacks, and I'm talking about 90%, exploit vulnerabilities that were known, and not just a day in advance. They're not day zero attacks. They're weeks and months and just unpatched. So patch those flaws. It could be your laptops or your mobile phones that are your weak point. And do you apply the same attention and security to those as you do to the systems in the office? I put storage of data in the cloud in there because my credentials were compromised in an attack on, should I say it, Dropbox, and it was not confidential information, it was a bit of development information that I was sharing, but I ceased that account and I deleted it, which is important that you delete the account as well. But I found out through Have I Been Pwned? A guy, an Australian called Troy Hunt, set this up. So you could find out if your email address has been compromised. And that's how I found out with Dropbox. Your service providers, your partners, your contractors, people you depend on for delivery of your service, if you're sharing information with them, you better make sure that they have equally secure systems as you do. Remember, they might be the weakest link. Now, on the right-hand side, if I just go back, you're probably wondering what these three graphics are. I'm going to say 30 years ago, we probably viewed our organizations a bit like a castle. You built thick walls and a moat and you kept the bad guys out and you felt safe. But before the pandemic, I was using the graphic of an airport to describe the organization, where you had lots of through traffic and you had to identify the terrorists, the bad guys in that traffic. But since the pandemic, and it was happening before the pandemic, the boundaries of the organization have kind of fallen away. Yes, we have head office and we have branch offices, possibly, but now we have more people working from home or working, God forbid, in cafes. And you can see there's no boundary around this. It's fairly open and clearly less secure than inside those strong walls. So there are a lot more vulnerabilities, and the bad guys know this and are exploiting them. So beware. Okay, so how do we mitigate the risks? How do we try and manage those risks? Well, don't be surprised if your IT department are fairly strong in enforcing their information security policy and require that you stick to the policy and the procedures, because it's only by enforcing a good policy that you will have that. I won't say it's perfect, but it's the basis at least for good security. Classify information. Is all information equally secret and confidential? No. Some is more, some is less. And if you treat it all the same, then the really important stuff won't get the security it needs. So encrypt sensitive data in transit and at rest. Manage the use of personal devices or prevent them. Remember the weakest link, and bad guys only need one. Require strong passwords. Now, a strong password, believe it or not, is not on the complexity of the password, it's on the length. And minimum of 10 characters. They're now saying, experts, that it should be 15. I'm not decided on changing of passwords. I don't think there's a benefit in changing a password every 3 months. I would change a password if it was a privileged account and somebody left the organization. I would change the password, and any of those privileged accounts probably change on a regular basis. But individual passwords changing, it's a double-edged sword, and sometimes people can make them too easy then because they're changing them all the time. If you're working remotely, two-factor authentication, and that means not just username and password, but maybe an authentication code, SMS text or email or iris scan or thumbprint, something that is who you are, something that is not just something you know. So something you have, something you are, make it at least two-factor. Key thing is training employees to recognize suspicious activity. You know, that regular quarterly training is so important, that if you have a procedure that if whoever's paying invoices, you probably should have a procedure that if the payee changes the bank account details, that the procedure is you pick up the phone and you phone the original contact and confirm that this change of bank details is actually correct. It's the bad guys do it. They're sending an email saying, don't lodge the money to that account, lodge it to the other one. And the good companies will always check with a phone call that that is indeed kosher. If you depend on third parties for delivery of your services, then you have to do due diligence on them. You have to satisfy yourself that their security is as good as yours. Document your procedures and stick to them. And don't just believe that they're being followed, check that they're being followed, because sometimes they're not being followed through complacency or lack of knowledge, or yeah, you need to check, okay? Right, if it was a blank sheet, if it was a new company and you're looking for some guidance, there is guidance out there on how to have better information security. I put up a few up here. NIST is an American cybersecurity framework, National Institute of Standards and Technology. I like it because it's English and it's aimed at not just at techies, but at non-techies as well. Whereas ISO 27001 is, the language is more aimed at the IT department. Critical security controls, again, it's another American one, popular with the insurance companies. Like to see you have CSC. COBIT, which is control objectives for business information technology. It's more prevalent in banks and large financial institutions. That's over 100 plus pages. Not for the faint-hearted. And even the Prudential Regulator Authority in the UK issued a cyber questionnaire, which was, I think, about 48 questions that if you did all of those things, you'll be in a good position from a cyber point of view. But I'm going to continue now with the NIST approach, because I think it's English and I think you get a lot from this. 5 categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And if I use my mind map, and you'll get a copy of this, so I'm not going to go through everything in detail, although I will now take a slide on each of these areas. But this is the structure of the NIST approach, that you identify what it is you have. And that the key thing there is the assets. What are you protecting? Where's the information? Protect it. You have measures in place to protect that information, that you detect if that is breached and if you have an attack ongoing, and then you have a response plan in place to respond to that attack or that breach. And then, depending on what the attack is and the damage done, the recovery may be minutes and it may be weeks or months, but you need to plan for all. So let's have a look at those now individually. Okay, just checking. Okay. Identify. Now, time doesn't allow us to go through these. You could probably spend 15 minutes in each of these, but to give you a flavor, first of all, governance has to be across all of this. And I put this up front, that if you don't have the policies supported by the board and senior management, it's not going to work in your organization. So have governance, have policies, procedures, and let people know the roles and responsibilities, and certainly make sure you're adhering to any legal and regulatory requirements. Then I would say understand your organization. You know, what is the mission? What are the objectives? And who do you depend upon? Get a feeling for what's at stake here. And then you can start identifying the assets, where they are, who owns them, in the sense that who's responsible for them. Data is an asset, not just the physical assets. And think of the facilities, your physical facilities that you need to protect as well. Identify all of them, and then, assuming you have a risk management process and function and practice, apply that process to your assets. Do the risk assessment, and you know, if you are getting threat intelligence and you know what's happening in the housing association space. Use that to focus your efforts on the risk assessment. Identify your third parties, your service providers. I've put service providers in here, but I would always say that's what's in the standard, but I would always say all third parties, and have a policy for managing those and even appointing them, and then processes to do your due diligence and identify any risks they might have. Okay, that's identify. Protect. You know where all the assets are now. You got to protect them. The first thing is access control. Who can gain access to what and when? And maybe I've put in here segmentation, that maybe a really secret or sensitive information is stored in a different segment of the network with very restricted access. The awareness training, again, everybody, including the third parties, everybody in the organization who has access to a computer on your network should be trained. Data security, which you could say is the nub of it. I would summarize this whole slide maybe with CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You need to focus on all three. The confidentiality is clear, and that's what we tend to focus on. But integrity, it's important that that information is not corrupted in any way, either maliciously or accidentally. And availability, you know, if you have a power outage, will you be able to access your information? This is information security, not just cyber attack. I think cyber attack is a subset of all information security, but availability. Attack might be an attack on your utilities, on your power, flood, you know, and it could be a flood from the ground up or from the tank in the roof down. So protect your data, protect the environments it's in. And when you are finished with that computer and you dispose of it, do you destroy the data securely, or is it left on a hard drive in a recycling center? Yeah, have processes and procedures for the full life cycle of that data, from where it comes into your possession, where you back up, to where you get rid of it. Maintain your systems. Now, protective technology, this is what we all hope is protecting us from cyber attack. But you can see in the greater scheme of things, the protective technology, like intrusion prevention, is only part of the story. And I'm not even going to go there because you assume that that's there. I want you guys to be aware of the other things as well. Okay, detect. Will you know that if you've got an attack? How will you know? Are you monitoring continuously? So do you know what an attack would look like? How would you know? Is it when somebody tells you that we're getting strange emails from your organization? Is it a third party? Be alert to these things. Now, speaking of alerts, you can have a system that will establish the baseline, will monitor normal activity on the network, and will then create alerts when something anomalous happens, or if they see activity that isn't normal, let's say like exporting files out to a server in Hong Kong. You know, why is our system talking to a server in another country? Things like that should cause an alerts. And then if you have alerts, you should have a process for following up on those alerts, responsibilities assigned to people to check those out. Respond. This is key area. So you do have an attack and you've confirmed it's an attack. How are you going to respond? Do you have processes, procedures to respond? And I'm talking about responding. If you have a cyber attack, you need to respond and deal with it in 15 minutes. Now, you don't have in that 15 minutes, you don't have time to be making up a plan. You need to respond and fix it in that time if you're going to come out of this unscathed. And it is possible. How are you going to communicate the fact that you've had an attack to your stakeholders, to the regulator, to the public? How are you going to assure them that you're in control? Again, you need to think about these things beforehand, have planned. This isn't IT stuff. This is whole organization stuff. And then how are you going to investigate it, the source, find out exactly what it is, contain it, mitigate it. And then when all is over, you know, what have you learned and can you improve? I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into a cyber attack and response plan, but again, time is limited here. There are guidelines. This is a framework, but it will be familiar to many. Prepare, identify, contain, eradicate, recover, and review. yes, you need to be thinking about these things long before you have a cyber attack, so that you have the team, the skills in place to respond to it, that you have data backed up and off-site, off your network, a clean copy of the data, you hope, have multiple copies, because you don't know how far back the infection goes, but certainly keep a copy of your data off your network. If it's on your network, it'll likely be corrupted, encrypted, as well as the live stuff. So have the tools in place, have preparation done. When you do have an attack, how do you get told about it? How is that awareness brought to the people who need to know, that escalation? If it takes 2 hours for the people who need to take action to find out you've an attack, you've lost already. That needs to happen in minutes. And it won't always happen, during working hours. It could be, 2 o'clock in the morning. How will you know? So you need to plans to contain it. How are you going to contain it? Cut the connectivity, and who are you going to call? Do you have a IT forensic consultant telephone number in your phone that you can call if you have an attack? It's not the time to start looking at the golden pages, the yellow pages. You need process then to eradicate and make sure that you can put your systems back live again and that they're clean and virus free. It'll take time, it'll take planning, and you can do a lot of this when you're not in a state of attack. And when all is finished, you need to review what went well, what could be done better, and change your plans accordingly. So this recovery is more for the general recovery of any incident, and if it's a big, whether it's a fire or flood, think of the recovery, not a cyber attack necessarily, but with the business impact analysis, you would know which systems are the key systems for you and in which order they need to be recovered. So you set priorities and recovery time objectives, that's the RTO. Something that is quite valuable that I encourage all customers to do is a scenario exercise. I prefer to call them exercises rather than tests, where you do a round a table, an exercise of what if, and simulate, or if you like, simulate a cyber attack and get people to play the role. What would they do? Very, very effective. Okay, a couple of words on roles because we're running short of time. The central part of this is from the Institute of Internal Auditors, and it was originally called the 3 lines of defense. Now, personally, I think it's 4 lines of defense because I think the governing body is the 4th line of defense. The governing body, the board of directors, is responsible for oversight, for ensuring that risk is managed. They don't manage it, but they need to ensure that it is being managed. They define the objectives, establish structures, provide resources, set the risk appetite. They do all of that, but they need to ensure that it is happening. The doers are the rest of us, people who are doing daily jobs, whether you're the CEO, CFO, or whether you're a marketing assistant, the people using the computers to deliver the service in the organization. We know the risks in our area. We're responsible for them. We know the controls that work. We know the controls that maybe are weak. And we should be capturing this under the guidance of the 2nd line of defense, the chief risk officer or the chief compliance officer. And it's the risk officer. We're all risk managers, but the risk officers and the compliance officers are the experts who will advise us, who will train us, who will show us how to do this. And challenge us, whether the controls we have in place are good enough. And they're monitoring and ensuring that the controls are effective because they're reporting back to management and back to the board that the controls are effective, as are the 3rd line of defense, the internal audit people who will independently check the controls. Now, I suggest internal 2nd and 3rd line should work together so that they're not duplicating effort in the same month, the same quarter. Certainly over a period of 2-3 years, each will cover the whole area. And if you wish, there's a 5th line of defense, which is the external experts, whether they're doing pen testing on your systems or whether it's an external auditor. So that's responsibilities. And finally, you got to assure the board that everything is okay. Now, if you're if you listen in 2 weeks' time, we're going to, over the next 2 or 3 lunchtime learnings, and starting tomorrow actually, we'll be talking about reporting to the board. But in an overall sense, the board needs to know the risk profile and needs to know that the risks are being managed. But particularly they're interested in knowing where the gaps are and what's threatening the objectives. Are the controls working? It's that effectiveness of the controls. That's what they need the assurance on, that our controls are good, people are following the procedures, our controls are effective. Have there been any attacks? Has anybody tried to hack into our systems, and have we repelled them successfully? Are we confident that we will, repel the next attack? And if there's gaps in our systems, in our defenses, the board need to know that. Maybe you need to get more funding or resources, and you need to make a case for it. If I was a board member, I would ask about those response plans, if we have them and have we tested them, because untested plans, probably will fail, to be honest. Key risk indicators. What things would tell us if the risk is increasing or not? Maybe somebody's counting the number of attacks on housing associations, and if there seems to be an increase, maybe there's an imminent threat to your organization. But you can probably think of 2 or 3 key risk indicators that will tell you the state of play in terms of cybersecurity. So that's it. I said I'd give you 5 minutes for questions. This is just top 10 risk compliance. Yeah. So thank you for listening. I know that's kind of heavy stuff, but hopefully you'll get something from that. And as Fiona said, the slides will be available, and happy to send them to you. Happy to take questions if there's any questions, or have I stunned you all into silence?
There aren't any questions at the moment. Maybe we'll give it a minute or 2, and if we don't have any questions, then people can send them in to you, Jerry, or to inquiries at calQrisk.
Yeah, happy to take them on an individual basis. Yeah. I will say, in researching this, I did find there were some attacks in housing associations, but there's nothing really particular, except to say you probably have a lot of personal data which might make you a target for attack. But then so do many organizations. So my presentation didn't have an awful lot of specifics maybe for housing associations, because they just aren't there. We're all susceptible, and we all have to equally defend. Nobody is safe, not even health boards. Okay.
Great.
All right.
That's it. I think we'll leave it there, Jerry. There aren't any questions coming in, but thank you very much for a very informative webinar as ever this morning. And thank you all for attending, and we'll see you all soon.
See you all soon. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.